Nice bass sound, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, Billy did a nice mix on that. He actually
Yeah.
did audio, did everything.
Nice, very nice. It's a good song, man.
Thank you.
I
Well,
just saw,
I was written for Brad.
yeah, I just actually saw him last night at the Red Door.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually where I met Ahmet, the bass player. You know Ahmet Turkmenikovic?
I know him very well.
Yeah, it's great bass player. And then Chris, of course, on drums. I didn't when I did Billy's thing. I had done a solo thing, and then I did a duo with Brad, and then we did a quartet, and then I was supposed to do a trio with Ahmet and Richie Garcia,
Oh,
who I've been friends with for ages. That Richie suddenly got like food poisoning, and he was in the hospital. He couldn't make it, so he was like, he called me up. He said, "I'm in the hospital, but I'm supposed to go home tomorrow. I think I can make it." And then his doctor's like, "No, you need to sit at home and recuperate." So Chris jumped in, and it's
oh
great.
my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say this, but it's true. We have an abundance of like an almost an embarrassment of riches, here. So we have so many great players, and it's
Yeah.
just so
Yeah.
it's really it's quite nice. Um, but I'm sure anywhere you move, you'll find you'll have good players.
I'm lucky to get to play all over the world. So when I do go, and if I don't take the band, when I
Yeah,
have a band, and I get pickup guys, I always find really good musicians. So
yeah.
that's not really a problem.
So, ladies and gentlemen, my guest, if you don't know it already, is David Becker. And God, it's been so long since we were trying to get together. So even just to have a phone call recently, but we did. We had a phone call, and now we're actually looking at each other online. And yeah, so sorry, I'm a little distracted. Yes, okay. And so, where to begin? Your life is so full, and we're going to talk a little bit about Joe Diorio as well today. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, you've had a really full. I mean, from what I know of you, had a really full life, full career already, and you're not even that old.
Well, I look younger than I am, but yeah, no, I'm lucky that I got started really young. I think one of the things for me was that my life sort of evolved in an interesting fashion. I mean, we all are products of our family environment. And mine is that my mother is European. She was born in Indonesia. She's a Dutch national. And her mother was German. And, I think I was talking about that she was in the prisoner of war camps in Indonesia. And when she came to this country and met my dad, who's an American who was stationed in the army in 1951 in Germany, that's where they met, actually met in Amsterdam. He had a big affinity for Germany and Austria because he had German relatives. His grandfather was a German who had come to this country, and he loved the area. So when he had the opportunity, he would take us over there. And he worked for KLM. So he got a job with KLM, and my mom, speaking Dutch and German fluently, of course, helped a great deal. We would tool around in Europe since the time I was even in the womb. There was one trip my mom made when she was pregnant, about 6 months pregnant. And the first trip I made, I was 2, because the prerequisite was that we had to be diaper trained. So I have 2 older brothers. I'm the youngest of 3. So my oldest brother, Ed, is 6 years older. Bruce, the drummer, he's 2.5 or 2 years older than me. So, but when my memories of Europe, we would go for a month. And the first place we would go is my grandfather's house in a little town outside of Amsterdam for a couple of days to get acclimated. Then we would get in a car and, drive all over Europe, go to Austria, Germany, sometimes France, sometimes the UK. We went to Denmark, Yugoslavia we went to. And we did that every year. And my parents wouldn't go during the summer because there were too many European tourists. So they took us out of school. I mean, you can imagine today calling the principal and saying, "Hey, we're taking the kids to Europe for a month," and I guess the school was fine with it. They gave us homework to do. I don't ever remember doing it. But I do remember distinctly coming back, and my mom would give us a note to give to our teachers that said, "We just got back from Europe, so if the boys are jet lagged, please excuse them from school early." So I think my brother tried to get out of school early, like for 5 days after that. You should be over your jet lag now. But yeah, it was a great experience. We were in our little world. Musically, my mom's family were piano players on the Dutch side and German side. In fact, my mom's great aunt played with Clara Schumann in Wiesbaden. She was in that whole art scene and was involved in that. And then her Dutch side, they were singers and classically trained pianists. And she learned to play piano by ear. She never learned to read music, but she could sit down and play. And my oldest brother, Ed, started playing at 5. I always wanted to be a drummer. So every year I got a little drum. And then my brother Bruce took up guitar at 7 or 8. And then somehow we switched. And but before I got into guitar, I played the trumpet. And that was a very formative time for me because I got to go to a really great junior high school out in Woodland Hills, Hale Junior High, where Ted Dector was the band leader. His son, Brad, is an arranger. His grandson, Graham, is a jazz guitarist in New York. But Ted had worked with Stan Kenton. He'd worked with Harry James. He did a lot of classical stuff, studio stuff. He knew everybody in town. So he knew how to get kids that were varying levels of ability to play, like as a band. He always instilled in us that it's not the individual, it's the sum of the parts that make it. And he told us once, he said, if the Glockenspiel didn't play in bar 47, the music wouldn't be whole. All the stories about Charlie Parker, about Lester Young, classical musicians. He knew Charlie Mariano very well, great saxophone player who moved to Europe and played with Eberhard Weber, among others, because they played in the Kenton band. And he used to talk about Jiggs Wiggum, who, I don't know if you know Jiggs, but Jiggs is a great trombonist who ended up in Cologne, teaching at the conservatory there. So he just had a whole plethora of connections. And he had a great jazz band that even the high school and professional guys, after they left the school, would come back to play in because he had great charts. So to make a long story short, one of the things that was a pivotal time for me, when I started playing guitar, I was like 15, I wanted to play rock and roll with my brother because he was playing with a band, but I still had the jazz roots a little bit. And Ted Dector called me once to play in his professional band. He had like a lot of the pros from LA would come and read charts on a Monday night. And I had a stage band rehearsal at the high school, but I blew it off and I went and played. And he came to me afterwards and he said, David, when I heard that you quit the trumpet, I was really disappointed. But then I heard you played the guitar and I knew why. I'll never forget that. That was like, I was like, oh, okay. So
that's cool. So, and that must have been, I can imagine how that felt, because I have kind of a similar, relations in my early days. My dad was a sax player, so I kind of grew up with some of that, and it felt really good to be acknowledged in the band, and
it was because I was first chair trumpet, in the 9th grade, and I played the jazz band. I had the solo chair. And, I was poised I won the music award. I still have a little trophy, outstanding music award in 9th grade. So I was poised to be the trumpet player who was going to, do whatever I was going to do. But when I went into high school, there were a couple things. The band leader at the high school I went to was an Austrian. He was a classical guy, so he knew nothing about jazz.
Yeah. And,
he had an award-winning marching band, which I joined at the beginning on trumpet, but because I started playing guitar, I was like, I really don't want to do this. So I had to tell him, and he knew me since I was in junior high, and he had kind of placed me in that, you're going to be in the band next year, you're going to be in the band, because my brother was in there. My brother got kicked out of the band. That's another story. He was a rebel rouser. But he was counting on me to be the trumpet player to come in there. And when I told him I couldn't do that, he was really upset. And I lost probably all my friends from the junior high band. They all dissed me because I didn't go in the marching band. So I was like cast out for until my senior year when I played in the jazz band. But it was very interesting. But having that Ted Dector tell me that, I think gave me the confidence that I did the right decision, because all along the 10th and 11th grade, I was getting my chops together playing guitar, but I was sort of like, nobody knew I played guitar.
Right.
because of that fact. Whereas at the junior high, I had the trumpet case out, I was in all the bands and I did all the performances. So it was an interesting time. And I think that was very instrumental in me continuing my studies with music.
So did you go to music school after that or
I
college?
did, yeah. What happened was Ted Dechter wrote me a nice recommendation for Berklee College of Music, which I planned to go to. And about maybe last semester of high school, I got accepted, and my brother was playing with a guitar player who had just graduated GIT. And he said, "Man, you going to go to Berklee?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "No, don't go to Berklee. Go to GIT. It's a new school and it's much smaller and they got great instructors. I just went there." And he goes, "Berklee, there's too many guitar players and it's crazy, the dorms and all this stuff." And I'm like, oh, in your head kind of goes, well, I had planned to do this, and now some guys tell me yes. I thought, okay. I thought, no, I'm going to go to Berklee. Then I met a guy at a music store where I used to actually, later on, I taught. It was the Music Stop. Did you know the Music Stop in
I know
Canoga?
that name. Where was it, in Hollywood or?
I was in Canoga Park in the Valley. It was Mel Zelnick, who was the drummer who played with Benny Goodman, and Terry Gibbs, the vibist.
Oh,
They used to have Louis Bellson and actually Louis' brother taught there, and Buddy would come out and play in the parking lot. So that was another connection. But there was a guy teaching there when I was playing guitar, and he goes, "You're going to go to Berklee?" He goes, "No, man, I went to Berklee." He said, "Go to GIT. It's much better." So then, that resonated in my head. So when I graduated, I thought, okay, I got to decide what I want to do. And my parents had bought a house they moved to that needed renovation. So I thought, okay, I'll take the first semester off, kind of think about what I want to do. And then I took a trip down to the school with my brother, Ed. He drove me down, and I met Becky Hicks, and she took me on a tour of the school, and I was like, I have to go here. So that was it. So I started actually a semester later than I normally would have out of high school. So I was still the youngest guy, because at that time, it was a one-year program. There was only, in the whole school, I think a couple hundred students. There was maybe 240 students, and half were bass players, 80 were bass players. Joe Diorio, Ron Eshte, Don Mock, Les Wise, a couple other guys, Kimbo Smith, who I dearly miss. Who else? Charlie Fechter, who's a great guy that was there teaching. It's, names that people will know. Paul LaRose, who wound up at USC, yeah. And anyway, that was a great experience. But I was the youngest guy, because most of the guys going to GIT at that time had gone to Berklee, Miami, or North Texas, and wanted to come to California to sort of the icing on the cake, go to this place and do this 1 year intensive study, and then kind of, hopefully get a gig somewhere or whatever. I was fresh out of high school. I played guitar seriously for 2 years. I could play. I had a lot of ability, but I wasn't theoretical. In my trumpet days, I learned to read music, but I could hear stuff. I had really good ears. So it was good that I met Joe Diorio, because the first couple of months I was really frustrated, because I was getting guys saying like, okay, you play that scale over that chord, you play that scale and this, like, and I was like, man, but I hear this and do this. And Joe Diorio was talking about Wes Montgomery and said, Wes thought in sounds. He didn't think in, scales and chords. And I went, well, that's how I hear stuff. He goes, you come and see me. But the interesting thing is, shortly before that happened, I saw Joe play, and I said, I got to get to know this guy. And the very first meeting with Joe, and Joe could be intimidating. I know a lot of people were very intimidated by Joe. I wasn't. But I was walking through the hallways, and there was this table in the middle of the hallways where this girl used to sell like juices and books and stuff. It was kind of a little snack shop. And Joe is sitting there having a juice, and he pulls his glasses down. He looks at me and goes, how old are you? And I said, how old do I look? Goes, I don't know, are you about 16? I said, I'm 18. And he said, oh, I guess that's about right. And on our record together, we have two improvised pieces. The one's called How Old Are You? The other's called How Old Do I Look?
Oh, that's cute, man.
I went to see him, and he immediately recognized, he said, play. And I started to play. He said, you keep doing that. And he showed me one thing, never wrote anything down for me. And I used to just hang with him all the time. I would go into his room every day. And then after I graduated, I would go back and hang, and we'd play. And then he invited me to play at some gigs when he was starting to, I went to every gig that he ever did in LA. But when I started to get more accomplished in my ability and had a band, he'd invite me to sit in, which was a great compliment. And I can't say enough about Joe Diorio. I mean, there's so many levels, personally and professionally and musically, and yeah, but he was a very instrumental human in not only musically, but also telling me, David, do this, keep doing what you're doing, and don't worry about this, and you'll be fine. And that was great advice. And at the age I was, I took that. I knew I had to do the work, but the encouragement, like Ted Dechter, was there. So,
Yeah, that's so valuable when a teacher actually teaches like that, they they recognize who you are and somehow they acknowledge that and affirm that that's what is going to work, and just get out of your own way and do the work, and
he said to me once, he said, probably just after we did the album together, and we were on the phone, and he said, David, he goes, I know you've had your influences and whatever from me and whoever, but he goes, you were always David Becker. And he said, that's a good thing.
Hmm.
And I said, thank you, man. I mean, that meant a lot, because he recognized that I had something that was unique. And he said, if you just follow that, I'll throw you stuff. He threw me stuff, but he never wrote it down and said, here's lesson 5. And there's a lot of guys that have a lot of written stuff from Joe. I bought one of his books, but I consumed it more from here. And I used to take tapes of him that I used to record of his trio with Bob Magnuson or Bob Mays or Sherman Ferguson, and I'd listen to it all night and just play with it, and that was great.
Yeah, we definitely will listen to some of you and Joe. And when I heard you and Joe, there was a familiarity between you two.
Yeah.
I won't say a similarity. It's more like
yes, it is. And I'm very open to the fact that Joe has had an impact on me. The thing is that, a lot of what Joe Diorio imparted to people was, a way of thinking and way of playing. But Pat Metheny has it too. I mean, he's hung with him in Miami. And Pat Metheny will say, Bright Size Life is Joe Diorio. He even said I should give him a royalty. He and the thing is, a lot of Joe's stuff, if you listen to him back with Eddie Harris in 1961 on his first recording, The Exodus of Jazz, you can hear Joe, great bebop guitar player, but you can hear that desire to go in that direction that he went into.
Yeah.
He bebop with the best of them, but then he got involved in the Fleminsky book. And he told me, I bought the book, man, because Eddie Harris said, get that book. It's the book, John Coltrane, they all had it in Chicago. He said, I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. He said, one night though, got home, I was going to a gig, I pulled it off the shelf, I took an exercise, I played it, and I heard how it worked harmonically, and I could use it on the gig. And that opened up the whole thing for him. And then when he went to Miami to go play with Ira, that was like, but he made that decision too, based on the fact that Wes Montgomery had passed away, because he saw Wes like shortly before he died. And when Wes died, he goes, well, where's the jazz guitar going to go? I mean, I can't do anything more than Wes Montgomery. And so that's why he kind of went in that direction. And Ravi Shankar had as much of an influence on him as Charlie Parker, I would say.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of that stuff that I got from Joe, the Indian sort of that kind of thing and the intervallic thing, are things that I personally liked. It wasn't that I went like, well, Joe Diorio plays fourths, I need to play fourths. I heard that. And when I saw him play, I went, oh, okay, well, there's a guy that encompasses all that and has that thing. He knew Wes Montgomery. They were good buddies, and Wes loved him. And he knew this guy, and the younger guys know him. So he's a good guy to know. And that was my first thought. I didn't realize that we would have such a deep, long-lasting relationship that it became. But I understand now why it was what it was, and I'm grateful for that.
I just have to interrupt this flow of conversation. First of all, Norma Jean Garza caught up with you by coincidence in Spain, and in Argentina too.
Argentina, yeah.
Yeah. And so she's here. And Chris Blondell sends his love. And we have a few more people. Hiroki from Japan and Mark Baldrich here. But yeah, you know, I loved, let's see, I have a beautiful recording of Joe and Ira and
Breeze and I?
huh?
It's the Breeze and
Yeah.
I think. I
Yeah.
think that's the album. Yeah,
That song just totally like knocked me out on that record.
that album's great because when Joe gave me a copy of that when he did it's one of the records that came out on that Ram Records label in Italy, and it was just him and Ira. They had reconnected. They did a jazz festival, and it's all ballads. I mean, Joe hardly
Beautiful.
solos.
Yeah.
And Ira plays a lot of flute. Man, it's one of those records. When we went on the road, Joe and I, in 1999 in Europe, we did this long tour where we did a bunch of workshops for USC and we did some concerts. I remember driving to Wilhelmshaven from Schaffenburg. It's like an 8-hour drive, and it's snowing. And Joe's like, I don't know if we're going to make it, David, because the snow's inside. It ended up dissipating, and we made it up there. But we were listening to McCoy Tyner,
Yeah.
the record that I got. It's a solo piano record that he recorded in Carnegie Hall with no audience. And I remember Joe just loving that record. And he goes, man, he goes, I want to do that. I want to just pick up the guitar and start with an idea and flow like McCoy's doing right now. I'll never forget that. It was great to watch him listen and kind of internalize stuff,
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
so.
I have to tell you about our recording. So we knew each other, and really liked each other as people. We talked about spiritual stuff a lot, and I don't even remember how we decided to make a record, but we decided to make a recording. And I had a student at the time who was a voiceover person, and it was her studio. I think she worked there in this tiny, funky little studio in Burbank, right? It wasn't like a normal music studio. So we went in and we recorded, and every song that we picked, regardless of if it was a swing tune, Joe would say, Kath, let's do this as a ballad. So we ended up with a ballad record. And he was trying out, I don't know if you've heard it or heard it in a while, but he was trying out like an effect.
Yeah.
And we just assumed that his company in Italy would pick it up. But when they heard it, they said they turned it down because of the effect.
Oh.
So then Joe was kind of like, well, okay, and he kind of really put it aside. And I still was like, for several years, I was like, I'm keeping this because at some point, it's going to come out. And then Joe had his stroke. And then the following year, he had been listening to all his tapes and music. And he called me up and he said, you know what? This is really pretty. Let's put it out. And then we took pictures and, put it out. And it's just it's so pretty. It's so.
I listened to some of it. I haven't heard it all, but what I heard is really beautiful. The thing that Joe did really well is he could play with anybody and really support the project, meaning that it wasn't about Joe Diorio. It was,
yeah.
There's so many things with Ira, with Eddie Harris, with Sonny Stitt. There's a saxophone player from the Netherlands, Gijs Hendricks, who he did a record with in 1980. And I saw that. I remember seeing that record. I was over in Europe when I was like 19, and I looked in the record bin and I see Joe on the cover. I'm like, Joe, I gotta buy this, And it's great because he's still Joe Diorio, but he's such a part with these guys. That's what he was so good at. That was my intention when we did a record together. And I'll back that up with a little bit of a story about what I wanted to do. Because when I got signed to MCA, I was pretty young. I was like 23. And that's a big deal. I never imagined getting a record deal with a major label, but somehow that came to pass. And on my second album, I called up Joe and I said, Joe, I'm doing my second album for MCA. I want you to come and play a tune with me. It's like, okay, great. So we set up the studio time to do it. We got kind of over budget and things run longer than they're supposed to. And I had to cut the session. And I felt so bad. I was like, man, Joe, I have to cut the session. He goes, nah, David, don't worry about it. He goes, man, when it's meant to be, it's meant to be. So years later, I was in Germany, and my record company over there, Acoustic Music Records, said, is there anybody that you want to make a record with? I'm like, yeah, Joe Diorio. Like, sure. Okay, how much money do you need? Like, okay, well, this is the budget. Okay. I called up Joe. I said, Joe, I got money for a record. We're going to do that record. And I wrote several tunes with Joe in mind. I wrote a blues, I wrote a waltz, and I wrote the title track. And then we improvised a bunch of stuff, and then we did some standards. But the standard tracks, I think they're probably the only take, or one of two takes. And we had 2 days, and I played 9-string guitar, and I played, there's some synthesizer on there and all the stuff. And the idea is just to let us have a conversation. We never spoke really about anything other than that we would do something and Joe would go like, hey, David, let's try it like this. Or I'll tell you a funny story. We were doing Stella by Starlight, which was the only take. It's 9 minutes long and we go all over the place. But I had invited Richard Smith to come down to the session. And we were recording and I didn't know he was there. And when we got finished, I looked up and in the booth was Richard and this guitar player from Sicily. And they were jumping up and down like two kids in a candy store. So that was a great compliment to what we were doing.
Hey, let's listen to a cut.
Okay.
I'm guessing it's on YouTube or your homepage?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. They're all the tunes are
Let's see. So I'm going to go here. Let's see.
Here's Blues for Brother Blue right there. Yeah, it's a long one, but you can start with that. That opens the album.
Okay, cool. Wow, that's nice. Okay, don't tell me. He's the second. You're the first soloist. He's the second. You're on my left. He's on my right, I guess. I don't know if you think like that, but that's right, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's tunes that we do where some of the improvised stuff where it's hard, like all the things you are and things like that. And it's hard sometimes. The weaving of the musicality is really incredible. And Joe even said, it's a great effing record. And Joe, in no uncertain terms, said every guitar player should be listening to it. He actually, there's a lot of guys in the guitar world, like Bill Milkowski in New York and Scott Yanow, that are big fans of that record. And it's become sort of a legendary duo record. It's the last recording that I know Joe did before the stroke. And I got the phone call, actually not the phone call, I picked up in Argentina for a tour by a guitar player who told me that Joe had a stroke because Sid Jacobs had called him to tell him. I called Joe right away and Joe was at home. They'd released him from the hospital. And I was like, Joe, man, he said, yeah, I had a stroke and I'm at home. I'll be okay. And so I went to see him after I got back from Argentina. But it dawned on me at that point, I said, wow, I mean, I'm so lucky that we got this. And the other thing is that we did a lot of interesting things. The name of the album, for instance, is a play on Kandinsky because he loved Kandinsky. And just before we did the record, I was at a Kandinsky art exhibit in Germany, and I bought Joe a huge book of his stuff. And I think Tina still has that book. And then so I told the art director that it's the color of sound, like the sound of color of Kandinsky. And so he came up with that Kandinsky-like cover, which is kind of. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we were lucky to have the musical gods with us that day or those days. And it means a lot to me, not only personally, but, musically, it's something that I'm very grateful that I was able to realize because, when you make records, that's kind of what people think you do. It's what they think you sound like because that's all they can gauge it by.
Yeah.
And through my catalog of music, I'm fortunate that I have that with the other stuff. So I can demonstrate, well, this is me here, and this is, but every record, I was actually working on a solo record of this kind of weird layered loop music called DOELEN at the same time that I did Joe's record. I was doing that in Germany.
Uh-huh.
One of the improvised things that I did with him a piece of that I took and put on the other record, which was, I mean, just by the idea, not Joe and I, but
Yeah, yeah. That's so cool. I don't know if you saw these. I posted them. This is
oh yeah, I did see those. Yeah,
really nice, right? And then this one.
yeah.
Yeah, I just love them. So yeah, and let's see. I have Taylor Hatch here. Do you know Taylor?
No, I don't.
He's a guitarist. He's a very smart guy, and he asks great questions. He's at UNT, and so he has a few questions before he heads to class.
Okay.
He always has great questions. He thinks that you played a show some time ago with Jeff Miley, one of his favorite teachers.
I didn't play with Jeff, but I know Jeff. He actually hosted the show I did at Billy Holting's. He was there.
Oh,
So
he's
but I have been to UNT. I did a workshop there, and we did a concert in Dallas not too long ago, maybe 8-10 years ago. And the radio station's been a big supporter of the DBT. They play a lot of the David Becker Tribune stuff. So I think they may have the color of sound too.
That's cool. And one more question from Taylor. How do you go about practicing counterpoint on the guitar? It's a process I've
Well,
always continually explored, but
okay, I have my guitar here, which probably demonstrate a little bit more than talk about it. The thing you have to do, and this is something Joe brought to my attention and that I sort of understood, but he made it really clear, is if you take a chord like this, like that C major 7, you have to break the chord up and start playing within the chord. So if I'm going to play chord shapes, instead of just playing the block chord like it is, look inside, see where the triads are, see where the shapes are. Even when you have a chord shape like this, that you might say, well, that's D major 9, there's no triad that's visible, but you have to realize that there are triad fragments. So once you start to do that, like a 2-5-1, you can see that these notes are moving. And start to get that into your vocabulary, start to break up all combinations of notes. And then you've got lines too that are built right in. So whenever I'm playing stuff, you know, those chords, they're normal chord shapes, you know, for the most part. Another guy who was very instrumental in understanding that was Jimmy Weibel. And if you don't know Jimmy Weibel, those who are listening, go get his books because he had a lot of etudes. And I spent a lot of time with Jimmy just around the time I did The Color of Sound with Joe. I used to come to LA and visit Jimmy, and Jimmy was a big fan. We actually played together on Joe's concert at MI. He came up and did a tune with us, which was great. So that's what I would say. Start to work on that. Start to break up your regular chord shapes and start using the combinations of strings to see what you have inside. And remember too that when you have triads in certain inversions, you've also got another note 2 octaves down. I have a book that I just wrote. It's a book of etudes. There's 25. Get that book and show your colleagues at UNT because there's really good stuff. Joe liked the book a lot. I wrote it during the pandemic, and there's a lot of good stuff for counterpoint. So,
okay, there you go, Taylor. I'm curious how you came up with the concept and the name of David Becker Tribune.
that's a really good question, which deserves an answer. When I put the band together, because that was my goal, when I got into GIT, Pat Hicks did my audition. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to make records, play in a band with my brother who plays drums, and be a jazz guitar player and tour the world." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, kid, don't let this go to your head, but I think you've got what it takes." Obviously, I could sit there and go like, "Gee, I'm going to make it." But man, there's no book for that. I knew there was a lot of work ahead of me. But when I put the band together initially, I didn't like trio. Trio was too sort of, I don't know, it was overused or something. And the bass player actually said, "I love the word tribune because a tribunal is a 3-man, governing thing." And so we just took tribune, and it just stuck. So
Cool. Yeah, it's very unusual.
When we went to Europe, our first tour in 1984, we did all these gigs in Germany, and we had done an EP for Warner Brothers, but it was not released, but we could use it for the radio. We ended up in the newspapers, and people put the David Becker Tribune, and it was like modern jazz from California. It was interesting because I could see now how that name sort of grabbed people's attention because it was different. So
cool.
That was stuck.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'm following along here a little bit. Um, so, um, so I guess after you graduated or left GIT, you were probably, I'm guessing, just performing.
Yeah, well, what I did is I left the school at 19, and then I didn't want to stay in LA. I mean, I grew up here. I came out here actually twice. I was born in Cincinnati, lived there 2 years. Then we went to Detroit for 2 years, went to California for 2.5 years. And then we moved to Chicago for a year. So then we moved back a year later, and I was 8. And it's funny because in that time, you're a kid, you don't really have a sense of being in a stable environment when you're moving that much. I remember writing a paper in the 5th grade saying, I feel like a transient, So, when we settled in LA, and, I grew up here, and of course the music program at the schools were all great. There's great musicians, and of course there's a studio scene and all that. But I just realized I didn't really want to go and play in LA. I mean, I knew I had to play gigs here, but I wanted to go to Europe because a lot of the musicians I admired were from Europe. And for some reason, I went over there because my dad, the airlines, I could go for free. So I flew over with a demo tape that I made on my 4-track of like 4 or 5 tunes. Tim Emmons, you know Tim?
I do.
Tim played bass. He was actually my brother Ed's bass teacher because my brother studied bass for a while. So Tim, because I knew him from my brother Ed and from BIT, he graciously came and played bass. And so I did this thing, and I ran around Europe looking for record companies at age 19, 20. And I almost got a deal with EMI when I was like 20. The guy in Holland is like, I really like what you do with your band. How much money do you need for a record? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't know anything. And so I developed relationships with guys like Hans Wendel from ECM Records and Matthias Winkelmann and Horst Weber from Enja Records. And I would just call him up every time I'd go to Munich, and I'd say, hey, I got some new music. And Hans would listen to everything I brought to him, and he was very encouraging. They actually were instrumental in helping me to get gigs because they said, you should bring your band over and play. I'm like, okay. So that was the plan. So we actually, when I put the band together, we played a couple of clubs. I think the first gig we did was in Reseda, California, at a place called Cafe Orleans. But our goal was to get into this place called At My Place in Santa Monica, which we did eventually get into. And then I got a phone call from a guy that ran a place called the Come Back In, which I'm sure you remember.
Yeah.
He was German, and he loved the music. And he said, can you play next month and next week and every month? And we had a steady gig there for a year. So we played, and that was great. That kind of let us solidify our stuff. And at the same time, I started doing some demoing for Martin guitars, which is kind of unusual because I'm a jazz guitar player, but I never played flat top acoustic. But Chris Martin, who's CF Martin IV, who runs the company now, at the time he was just Chris. He worked for the company, but he had no major role other than being a Martin. And he was good friends with our bass player, Matt McFadden. So I went to a NAMM show and I started to play, and he liked the way I played because I didn't play bluegrass. I played this weird kind of whatever it was. He said, do you want to come and play at the booth? I'm like, sure. So I started to do that. And then I started going to Frankfurt with them for the music fairs. And then we started doing clinics. And Chris would talk about the history of his family and the guitars. And then I would go play for 40 minutes with just a guitar and improvise all this weird stuff. And so that was a great experience. And we went all over the world with that. And then the advertising manager said, we've never used anybody in an ad. I want to use you in an ad because Steve Howe of Yes and at the time Asia just signed with us. And I'm going to put an ad together with you and Steve Howe. So in the middle of 1984, I did a photo shoot. And then like a couple months later, I was in every magazine, like guitar player, also like Circus Magazine and Musician Magazine. With, you know, it's like if you're a rising star or a superstar, your choice is Martin. And there I am with Steve Howe. So, you know, there was no internet at the time.
Yeah.
Because of that, that gave us a little bit of a platform to go to Europe to book gigs. But Will, from the Comeback In, said, oh, I'm going to book a tour for all my artists in Germany. You know, I'll go with you. And like literally a week before I was going to go, Will's like, I can't go. You have to go. Like, well, okay, so what do I do? So I had to scramble. And my brother and the bass player had sold their cars and they were going to Europe. We were going to buy a van and go tour around. And luckily I was able to get these gigs. And I remember getting like 4 nights in Munich.
Wait, were the gigs solid and Will just couldn't come?
No, Will couldn't come. He had said he had a guy that was in Marburg who was going to put together a few gigs, but they hadn't been set up yet. So we were going to go together to go set them up. And then like a couple months later, the band would come over. So I ended up going, and because of my contacts, the guys that I knew at the record companies, I remember calling Hans Wendel, and he's like, oh, you should call my friend Sepp at the Unterfahrt. I'm sure he has a gig for you. I call him up. I'm like, hey, oh, sure. What night? I got 2 nights. Call this guy. And then I had 4 nights in Munich. And then we were in the major newspaper. And then in Berlin, I remember going there. It was our first gig in Germany. And I had to go through the wall and stuff. And East Germany. It was packed. And they had played us on the radio. And the guy called me up and said, can we play your record on the radio? I said, I have 1 copy. I said, like 1 copy I had. He goes, I'll give it back to you. So I sent it to him. And there's no email. You have to just like have regular phone conversations. I would go to phone booths, in Munich and call up Hans or Horst Weber and stuff. Well, we did that tour. And that actually, we got a lot of great press. And at the time I had a guy that was like a school friend that was a musician who wanted to manage the band. And so he came back we came from Europe and ended up at Chris Martin's house in Pennsylvania because he had just inherited his father's house. His father passed away. It's the old Martin house. He said, you guys can stay here and work out of here, go book your gigs. So he gave our manager, booking agent, what do you want to call him, an office and a book. He had like the NACA book of all the colleges, and he could call all over the country and book us. I had this little band from, California. They just came from Europe. And so we got gigs. I mean, we played everywhere, man. We must have done in a 3-month period, probably like 50 or 80 gigs. Every college. We played the main.
Those were the days. I almost think that calling was better. Because you actually got a personal relationship with people, It
was different. I mean, that was the only way you could do it. But he'd call up the student, whatever, activities guy or person. Yeah. And I remember one night we played in Ames, Iowa at the Maintenance Shop, which is a famous place. Mm-hmm. It holds about 350, 400 people. And at that same night, Bruce Springsteen was playing. It was his Born in the USA tour. And I thought, man, no one's going to come to this gig. And we were billed as the cheap alternative to Bruce Springsteen. It was packed. We played every tune we knew. And, and then we had to, that was it. And we didn't have records to sell because the record we recorded was done live to 2-track at Warner Brothers Studios. It was nice. It was nice 5 tunes. But we did get radio playing KKGO with that record and a lot of the college stations. But that led us to getting an offer from the studio, which became Amigo Studios when Warner Brothers sold, by a guy, Chet Himes, who is famous for doing Christopher Cross's records. Oh. So, and he did work with Carole King and a bunch of people. So he actually said, why don't you come in and do a full 32-track to digital record? Okay, so we went in the weekend of Live Aid. We recorded 4 days.
Wow.
And that wound up in the hands of Ricky Schultz, who took over for MCA Jazz. And he loved it enough to sign us, and he met me, and he knew that we toured and all that. So suddenly we were label mates with Michael Brecker and Jack.
This is wild. Oh, by the way, my friend found this.
Oh, there you go. There it is. Yeah.
Look at you. Yeah. Oh my God. You look really young there.
I was. Well, I always looked younger. That's the thing. When I met Joe, he thought I was like, 14 or something. So.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm grateful for that, and you don't realize the impact that things like that have. But I remember walking around like in malls and stuff, because it was also in a Circus magazine, which was a huge rock and roll magazine. And
Yeah.
people would come up to me like, "Hey, you're that guy. I see you in Circus Magazine." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess. Okay." So, they didn't know what I sounded like or what I did. They had no idea,
Yeah.
you know. But I have to preface that with something I haven't talked about. When I was a kid, I'll send you a link. I did TV commercials
Oh.
for a very short amount of time. I started late. I was 10, but I got national spots the first year. In fact, if you go to YouTube, because you got YouTube, go to YouTube, put in Big Jim Sports Camper commercial, 1973.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me find this.
Talk
Uh,
about it much outside of things like this.
okay, let's see. So, YouTube and big big
Big Jim Sports Camper commercial, 1973, I believe it was.
Big Jim's. I'm sorry, what was it?
Big Jim Sports Camper commercial, 1973, I think it was, or 72. And there it is, right there, that top one. Just hit on that, and you will see me. I'm the kid with the blonde hair and the
Sports camper, he's the king of the road. Then you help him unload.
Okay, let's unload.
Big Jim Sports Camper.
Mountain rescue rig. Wow, look at all this gear.
The action's here and you got all the gear. Big Jim Sports Camper.
Let's set up camp.
Big Jim Sports Camper comes with all the gear you see right here. Big Jim and
man.
camping outfits sold separately
Well,
from Mattel.
Now wait,
I
which
had a little bit of a
kid
show
were you?
business career before music,
Which kid were you?
the blonde, and I was doing the narration. So,
Oh,
and I got that year. I got 3 national spots. I got a Sugar Smacks, I got a McDonald's, and that one. And I mean, I made more money than I do now. But it was a good experience because I didn't want to be an actor, but I got to work with Eddie Albert, from Green Acres. I did a commercial with him. Worked with Patrick Duffy. I did an episode of his show called Man from Atlantis. Worked with Ann Blythe on a Hostess commercial. So I had a lot of experience in front of the camera. In fact, when I would do photo shoots, when the record companies would hire guys, they'd go like, "Have you done this before?" Because most musicians don't know how to stand and stuff. I go, "Well, yeah, I've been in front of the camera before." So I guess that prepared me for the life as a performing musician.
Also, my friend also he does this, which is usually 70 to 90% accurate. But so this is like all credit, all music credits, and at the top talks about you, and it says fusion and post-bop guitars.
Yeah. I mean, that's a funny thing because first of all, I've never believed in any kind of like, well, your music is this or that.
Yeah.
The fusion thing comes from the fact that nobody knew what to call it, because at the time that we started making records, there was kind of electric jazz, acoustic jazz, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah,
So-
fusion was a word that was thrown around a lot. Yeah.
Which I hate, but
Yeah.
but then they say post bop. Who knows, man? We got lumped into a lot of things. I mean, the thing is, the first real big gig I did was opening for Miles Davis. In fact, that was an interesting gig because my manager at the time called me up and said, "What are you doing on Saturday?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "You're opening for Miles Davis and Chick Corea solo." Like, okay.
Holy moly.
So he got me on this jazz festival that was Jack DeJohnette's special edition, Steps Ahead with Michael Brecker, Chick Corea's trio debut with Dave Weckl, John Patitucci, and Miles' electric band with John Scofield. And I was stuck just before Chick and Miles.
Wow.
And I wanted somebody to play 30 minutes of solo guitar. And it was at the Long Beach. And
Wow.
I remember playing it, and I guess it went over pretty well because the audience responded. And I remember Chick Corea's guy coming to me and saying, "Man," he said, "of all the guys today out there, you were the most communicative. The whole audience was with you the whole time, and I just want to tell you that." I'm like, wow. And Charlie Niles was the MC.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
That's cool. Now, see, this is why I say this is not always accurate. You
No.
probably didn't play clarinet, flute, and sax on
No.
Dave Toll's record.
No.
But anything that says guitar, reflections over time, or Batavia.
Batavia, that's my record. Yeah, that's mine. So that's
You're not
Paul
playing.
Calais. I worked with because I worked with Ken Calais. Ken actually, when I did the second and third records, Ken Calais, who was, you don't know, he's a great producer engineer that worked with Fleetwood Mac. He did Rumors and Tusk, and that. His daughter Colby had some records out and had a career. She still does play, and I played on a couple of her records because I've known them forever. I knew her when she was 2 years old, so he would call me to do that.
So right here, Colby Calais.
Yeah, I did that. I played
Yeah. And Leaving Argentina.
That's my record, right? I did something else that should be up there. There's a piano player that used to record for a label called Narada Records, Spencer Brewer, that might come up. And then I don't know what else.
Wow, there's a lot of people named David Becker, apparently.
Yeah, but most of the records are my releases. I've got 17, I think, 17 or 18 records.
Okay, yeah.
There's a lot. But for the majority of my career, it's been kind of doing my own thing, which I'm very fortunate to have done. But, you know, a lot of that was Joe Diorio telling me when I was a kid, you go for the music, don't worry about the money. If you go, because Joe said, I never knew what I wanted to do, but you know what you want to do, you follow that and things will work out for you. So I always keep that in mind. And you know, it was there, you can't set up a career by going like, okay, I'll go to school, I'll do this, I'll do this. Things just happen, but you have to be aware. It's kind of like being prepared to do things or to know how to maneuver through something. Like the tour we did in '84. Yeah. And I'd not been going to Europe all that time, I wouldn't have known how to get anywhere. So I would never have been able to book those gigs.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, of course. I mean, that is a constant opinion, belief, action of most musicians who have made a life out of it. You know, you just keep going. You don't. It's basically improvisation. We're good at improvising, and you know, we just something appears and we go, yeah, sure.
Well, I can tell you a story. You know, when I was on MCA, we were doing a tour for the second record, which was like #1 on the charts, and we were touring the East Coast, and the publicity guy who still does publicity on with his own company, Don Lukoff, called me up when I just saw him in Baltimore, and then we drove to Colorado for the next gig. I get there, he calls me in my hotel, he goes, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No, why?" He goes, "I just got fired." And MCA fired 160 people, and everybody from the jazz division except for Ricky is gone. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, then your support is like dead, you know? So you could go and put your head between your legs and go, man, that's a drag. But I said, well, I'll find another label. And I did. Within 6 months, we had another label. We were in the studio making a record, because that's what you have to do. You have to be resilient and keep going. But because of what I had learned through that experience, you know, we used to do stuff like we would drive to the distribution points in Texas and visit the sales guys and play for them, like set up in the warehouse and play. Because, you know, they're the ones going with your record to the, you know, Tower Records going like, I got a new record from Tom Petty. I mean, I was label mates with Tom Petty and Alice Cooper and, you know, not just the jazz guys, because I was on MCA proper. You have to compete with everybody. So I'll tell you a funny story. I wanted to go and do a promotional tour of Europe after the record came out. So I bugged Ricky. I said, Ricky, I want to do this. I want to meet this guy and go here and all this stuff. Yeah. Okay. And then so he comes to me and goes, man, he goes, if you want to go to New York, I can get you a plane ticket. But if you want to go to Europe, you got to go through the international people. Call Stuart Anderson was his name, or Stuart something, in London. And I had a gig booked in London to play this guitar festival. So I call him up from the States and I said, hey, Stuart, I'm coming over and I'm doing this thing. And he goes, okay, well, we'll meet when you get here. And he called me up at my hotel. He said, I'm going to send a car to pick you up. There's a Patti LaBelle after show party that I want you to come to. And we can meet and talk there. So, okay, great. So I meet him, and then there's Patti with her whole entourage. So I go to his office the next day. He's like, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to go to see the people in Hamburg that do the distribution. I want to go here and meet this guy. I want to go do this in Germany, do that, do this. And he goes, okay, gets on the phone, tells the secretary, okay, book this, 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 and this. And he looks at me, he goes, well, I'll get my money back somehow. And I mean, if you told somebody at a record company that you wanted to do that, they say, you're insane. They'll never do that. They'll tell you no. But somehow I managed to get him to do that. And I went and I did all that stuff. So it allowed us to have personal contact with a lot of the record guys. And, you know, so. I think I lost you, Cathy, or I think you're frozen. Not sure what happened here. Okay. Let's see.
You know, because I don't use my phone.
Right. Let me turn this off so we can. Okay. I can't. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. How we do that? It says meeting is now streaming live, so I guess it is. Let me check. Let me go check with my wife because she's watching it. Hang on.
Okay.
Hey, Lori Becker. Is it back on? Yeah. Okay. There, perfect. Shit, we're in. So modern technology, we're good.
Okay. Are people seeing me? I don't even know.
You were up. I see your picture. There you are. You're there. There you go. There you go.
Okay, wow. This is interesting.
So, yes, they must have heard the end of my story, but in any case, we can move on from there. So.
Let's see. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm having a lot of trouble because I lost my electricity in my house.
But see, because you improvise, you know how to get through something like this.
That's so true. Oh my gosh. Well, tell me something, and while you're telling me, I'm gonna text my husband and see if he can come home and help me.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Well, I was just talking about this, getting stuff done through MCA, and just when you do it yourself, you end up getting better results than if you rely on people. That's always been my experience.
Yeah.
And, I've been very lucky in that regard that we were able to get out there and play at a time when jazz was quite popular in this country, and get out and be on the road. I think a lot of musicians, think, well, I'm going to do a record and then I'll become famous and then I'll tour. But touring is a difficult animal to maneuver if you don't know how to do that. And, we were willing to go out in a van and drive, hundreds of thousands of miles and play. But I tell kids, when kids say, well, what do I do? I mean, today it's a different dynamic as far as getting known, because you can do a YouTube thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you get out and play in front of an audience, that hasn't changed. That mechanism is the same. You need to get out and be able to get on a stage and put a thing together. And that was one thing that we always did. We always had a set list. We always knew we're going to open with this, we're going to do this. And I always tried to pace the set. I just go like, well, let's just play, whatever. That's important in putting together something that, resonates with an audience, and also understanding how to play to a big audience. Like if we do a festival for 10,000 people or play for 50 people in a club, there's a different dynamic.
While you were talking about traveling in Europe and stuff, I was remembering, of course, like 20 years ago or so, the internet wasn't really happening. I mean, it was beginning.
Right.
And I had my office, and what I was doing was I would send out, packs to Europe, right? PR packs. And I would get one gig and I would, teaching or singing, and then I would make phone calls, set up the tour. And it was not that hard to do. You just had to go through the steps.
Exactly.
And I didn't make a shitload of money, but I made enough money to be worthwhile.
Sure.
And to think of that now, I mean, I'm kind of
I can't hear you now. I lost your audio. I don't know what's. Yeah, your audio is gone. So
sorry, somebody was calling.
Oh, okay. You're back. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's for me, touring was for a long time in the States. We did van travel, and at the end of the bigger tours that we did in the late '80s, early '90s, before I moved to Europe, were with the trio, and we had a tech, and everything was, we were making decent money and playing nice gigs. But what had happened when I went to Europe is that things changed. We would do tours in buses, but we would fly to a lot of gigs. So in the 2000s, when I would do festivals in Argentina, the bass player would come in from Dusseldorf, my brother would come in from LA, I'd come in from wherever I was, and we'd meet all in Buenos Aires and then go and do the tour. Or we would go meet in Nashville and go tour the States or whatever. And those are logistics that you have to understand how they work. In fact, I just did an apprenticeship as the teacher or whatever for the Grammy University. So I had a student who's studying to be an agent they put us together with different kinds of people. And I was talking to him about telling him stories about touring, you know, because his only experience is sitting in a classroom with a guy talking about how to book a tour. But, you know, there's so many elements of that if you don't know the personal experience, it's hard to really know. And it was always fun to kind of go back to different stories and talk about that.
Yeah. So, and recently, I'm going to go like a little closer to the light. Recently, you're talking, well, you are going to be moving, and you're packing as we're packing, as like you took 2 hours out of your day to actually talk instead of pack, which I appreciate.
Oh, sure.
But so, and yeah, so so you're thinking of going to Europe. Yeah,
well, we don't, because I still work there a lot, and we may buy a piece of property there, but we also might look in the East Coast, New England, and buy something there. My wife and I sold our house, and we're going to move to an apartment in Southern California here in LA for about a year, and then just see what the wind blows, see what we want to do. There's no stress, there's no pressure. And we'll see what happens. So.
And yeah, so I guess a question too. Sometimes people ask this of my European guests, and you certainly could tell us, how does the music scene differ in Europe?
Well, that's a good question, because there are a lot of similarities, but there's also differences in the sense that if you are an established musician, let's say in Germany, and this would also apply to Austria and Switzerland too. The dynamic of how a gig is booked and what you get paid and hotels and all that stuff are certainly something that is a part of that. Whereas here in the States, if you get a gig in Santa Barbara, the promoter's not going to pay for your hotel unless you're doing a concert at a concert hall. So understanding where the places are, understanding, you know, I have an agent in Germany that books me for most of that now. But even if I did it myself, I would know where to look, what town, and I'd know what venue to check out, and I would know, you know, what to tell them.
Yeah.
That's, as far as local scenes are concerned, I mean, an interesting thing is like in Berlin, which is a huge city, there's a lot of music, but it's not a very good place to play. It'd be a great place to play because it was so small, but because there's so much stuff going on there, it's probably one of the least favorite cities for touring musicians to play in. And I'm one of them because there's just too much competition about stuff. But it's not to say, but there are great musicians all over.
Yeah. Where's one of your favorite places to play? Is it Italy?
Oh, I love playing in Italy. I'll be there in end of April in Tuscany. And actually, it's a town that is where Sting lives. And I've been to Sting's house. He lives about half a mile from this place. It's a villa. And I do a workshop.
Is it northern or southern Italy?
It's kind of what's Tuscany, so it's kind of in the middle.
Do you know the two brothers who went to MI?
Sure. Yep. I do know them. I have yet to play with them. We talked about doing a gig for Joe, so we'll see if that comes to fruition. But yeah, no, I do this every year in Tuscany, and it's literally a little village outside of Florence, and it's great because I do a master class all week, and then I do a concert on the terrace overlooking the vineyards, and it's great. I'm looking forward to it. I usually do it in the summer, but this year we're doing it at the end of April, so I don't know how the weather will be, but.
Yeah, it's really pretty.
I love playing in Japan. So
yeah, it's pretty there. I worked for the brothers, Giovanni and his brother, and in Pescara. Actually, I was with Jamie Finley at the time. We were on tour together. Yeah, we
had a duo tour. I remember that. I remember when Jamie put that together and you guys were out on the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that was fun. I'll never forget some of that stuff. It was really wow.
Yeah.
one night, and this wasn't even, I don't even know, I don't think we played. I think we were invited to have dinner at this place that was, it had been a nunnery and had been bought by this guy and redone. And the, I remember we started eating this incredible food, you know, and of course we're just eating normally. We had no idea that it was one of like 20 courses. It was amazing.
I've had those. I had a meal like that. I was in Milan back in the mid 80s, and I did a guitar show for this guitar synthesizer company from Australia. And Neil Sean, who's a guitar player from Germany, who was a fan of mine because he used to see me play at the NAMM show. And he was there with his guitar. So we had this huge dinner at some place, and I think we ate for 5 hours. It was like, you know.
Yeah, those Italians know how to eat, man.
Yes.
It's really good food. Really,
Yeah.
I like Italy a lot. I think Italy is probably one of my favorite places. It's just warm,
Yeah.
and except for the only thing I don't like about Italy is if the gig is scheduled for 7, you don't start till 10.
Right. Like Argentina. Yeah. Argentina's the same way. So, but you know, you go with the flow. So.
Have you been to Japan?
I have, yeah, a few
Yeah.
times. Yeah, Japan's great. I was supposed to go, like when the pandemic hit. I did a solo tour, and I also had the band on some dates in Germany. And I came home, and I was supposed to go to Japan that May, and then of course everything shut down. So I have a trio of guys. It's a bass player and a drummer who live in Japan who play with me when I go there. So we're gonna do another tour, but it just depends upon when things open up again. So.
That's cool. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's talking to us on Facebook because I'm having trouble going back and forth since I'm on my phone. My husband is coming home, so who knows? Maybe we'll get back on. But yeah, Japan's really cool. I remember there was a guy who actually contacted me about Ted Green, and he was like a Ted Green guy. He plays really good. I mean, beautifully. He did a Christmas album like that. It's really pretty. I've been going for so long that I've really seen changes in the musicians. You know, I started going in, I don't know, the early 80s, I guess. And at that time, the best players were the bass players. I mean, the piano players were great, but they were copies of like the old, you know, straight ahead players. But the bass players were very musical and like freer. And then the drummers used to drive me crazy in the beginning. They'd play something really hip for 4 bars and then change.
Okay.
And like all through the whole song. And then over the years, my partner there was a really good piano player who played kind of like Keith Jarrett, you know, which was, I think, challenging for him, but he was determined and he actually made quite a name for himself there. But over the years of playing with him, and you know, you saw the musicians change. You know, the younger musicians coming up were, you know, they just got hip. You know, they got hip to what was supposed to be going on. You know, it was great.
Yeah, I saw a lot of guitar players when I was over there, and there's some good musicians over there. I did a jam session with these kids, like it's sort of a workshop, and these young players, this young trumpet player girl came in and she sounded great. I said, "You sound like Clifford Brown." You know, it's like, you're doing what you're doing, you know. I just wanted to mention something too that I know we haven't talked about it yet, but I did something for the Space Channel, which I've been doing stuff for them now the last couple of years.
Yeah.
They have a dedicated channel for space news. I did a whole series where I set up in a theater in Brownsville, Texas, and I played solo, and I improvised for each planet. And the series is called Planets. So if you go to spacechannel.com, you can see the broadcast. They've been showing it on the channel because you can watch it on Roku TV as well, but they've been rebroadcasting. And it was a lot of fun, and we have plans to make that sort of a live gig where we're going to go to some cities and I'm going to perform. I talked a little bit about, you know, the connection of the universe and music, because as a musician, an improvising musician, you see the relationship of how the earth moves and all these things work together and how music works. And I was very humbled to be able to do that. So it was a lot of fun.
So remind us what Space Jam really is, because I've seen talk of it. I think you actually sent me a link to it, which
well, Space Channel is a dedicated, it's like a news channel. It's a TV station located in Texas, run by two guys that I know, and they do all sorts of things. They've got news reports. They talk about all the launches and things like that. They do little short films. They have music. A lot of my music has been used in some really cool videos where they have these, camera shots of the desert or the stars and things like that. And then I did a live thing for them where I did the planets. And that was a lot of fun because I just talked about, okay, so Mars is this, and they gave me the information and I just improvised something. And I used loop pedals so I could get like a whole plethora of sounds going on. And they did a great job with the audio because they actually had an engineer, an audio guy come in and did miking throughout the entire theater.
Oh, very
cool. So it's a cool series. I watched it a couple times with my wife and her daughters. And when you step back from something and you look at it from somebody else's perspective, they did a great job. So I was very, very pleased with it.
That's really nice. I love that. I'm definitely going to check that out. Yeah. Do you have a favorite gig that you've played?
Wow. Well,
one of a favorite gig that you remember?
Sure. I mean, this will preface with a little story. So when we were touring with that second record for MCA, Siberian Express, it was the top of the charts. And we were touring, and I did an interview at the State Department with Voice of America. And at that time, it was 1988 or something. And the guy said, "You ever thought about playing in the Soviet Union?" And I said, "I'd love to," because my grandfather had gone to Indonesia and he'd gone through Siberia with Trans-Siberia, and he'd been in Manchuria and all those different places. And I'd love to go play. He goes, "Well, you got to write to the State Department. They're having this and that, and write your congressman." And back then, no internet, you don't know what to do. So I wrote a letter and sent an album and stuff. And I got a reply from somebody somewhere saying, "Well, thank you for your inquiry, but blah, blah, blah. We, no chance." So a couple years later, when we had relocated to Europe, I got an offer to do a tour of Russia, and with Bose speakers. They were the sponsors because I used their equipment. And they said, "We want you to go with the band and do concerts in St. Petersburg and Moscow." We also got to play with some musicians there too on our off nights, and perform your set. And we're going to put it on TV, and it's going to be promotion for the speakers because Russia just opened up. So I remember playing in Moscow the last night of the tour, sold out theater. And as I was looking at the band, I'm standing on stage and there's a sold out crowd. I thought about that story about the Voice of America and trying to get to the Soviet Union. It didn't happen, but years later, there I was, and I actually got to do it. So I guess the moral of the story is if you persist, it will happen. It's supposed to happen. Same thing with Joe. We weren't supposed to record back in '88. We did it in 2004. So.
Yeah. That's cool. So let's see. My next question is, well, I'd like to know, I'm really into books. I have a crap load of books by my bed and that I go back and forth. The latest one that I'm really trying to stick to until I finish is Kenny Werner's second book, which is called Being the Instrument. And I like it. I like it as an extension of Effortless Mastery. And I think he's let go of a lot of stuff that, like he said, for instance, he was always really good. He just was born being able to play the instrument. However, he didn't know how to bring over the lessons from playing the instrument to his personal.
Yeah.
And that I think when he came out with the second book, he had learned, So, and of course they have the Effortless Mastery department at Berkeley, which is mind blowing to me, right? For the last 7 years or something. So are there any books that that you like, that you read, or that you suggest to your students or friends that are inspirational?
There's a couple. I mean, me personally, I read some books that were interesting. I mean, one of them, which will sound kind of funny, but I read a book that Gene Simmons wrote from Kiss.
Oh.
It was an autobiography, which, whether you're a Kiss fan or not, has no bearing. He just talked about his life.
Yeah.
An immigrant from Israel, not speaking any English. His mother, being a Holocaust survivor, and then winding up in one of the biggest rock bands in the world. That whole journey was very interesting because he spelled it out. And he, but as far as that, any biography, I knew Ian Carr, the trumpet player from England, that was in the United Jazz Rock Ensemble, and Ian wrote a book about Miles Davis, and he wrote one about Keith Jarrett. So those books are really good books to read. I think any book you can read about somebody's life, which kind of tells the story about what they went through, I think is good, because it's reflective to relate to yourself, in that we all kind of live in this world where we kind of perceive like, well, if this guy turns me down or this doesn't happen, I'm not good enough or whatever. But Pat Metheny fell from the sky. But if you talk to Pat Metheny, I mean, he got in a van and drove thousands of miles and lifted his own gear forever. People think it just happened. You have to look at things from the inside and from the outside. And any book that will give you that perspective, I think, is worth reading. I definitely feel that way. So any biography or autobiography about some musician or artist is really worth checking out, I think.
Yeah, I think I heard about, what did I hear about? Was it Herbie Hancock? I think there's a new book out. I can't remember, but yeah, that's good advice. I mean, that's why I like conversations like these. I like the Noontime Hang because it's casual.
Yeah.
We can talk about a lot of different things, and
that brings me to a point that we haven't touched on, which some of your viewers might relate to, or maybe they don't. Like, the students should realize that everything you do in your life is related to whatever your art is or whatever your passion is. Meaning that I have a lot of musicians who come to me and say, well, I'm going to school and I have a band, but I have a job 2 days a week over there selling coffee. But that's just till I get my band going. It's like, no. That job working at the coffee place is so important to your whole makeup of who you are. And you can relate things to doing that to what you do musically. Because when I'm talking to you like this, I don't differentiate doing a concert, doing a workshop, doing a one-on-one lesson. It's all the same. It's an exchange. And when you start to realize that you are everything that you touch and it affects you and you can draw from it and should draw from it, it gives you a much better perspective. And I can't say anything more than that other than tap into your experiences, because they will be very valuable for you in the future. Even if you think, oh, it's just a job, I just do that, but that's not me. But it is. You're the guy going up making the coffee or whatever you do, but do it with passion and understand that it has a purpose in your life.
That is so cool. And for a few reasons. Well, it's cool. That's the first reason. Second reason is I actually just finished a book that I'd been working on for 15 years called The Art of Being. The Act of, that is not the name of it. The Act of Becoming. See, I already. It's just barely for sale, but it's a very small book. It's a philosophy about how, for instance, a lesson in life actually is the same lesson in other areas like voice technique and singing jazz. Exactly what you said. And also another cool aspect of that is, I've been taking piano lessons now with Jeremy Siskind, who's a really incredible pianist, and he has a class. And that, and also reading Kenny's book, it's like you don't have to take all the information. If you take this much of the information and really learn it and absorb it,
yes,
like you're saying, if you make coffee the best you can make it, and you figure out, think about it, then when you go look at your guitar playing,
Right.
that is part of you now.
Exactly.
So actually, yeah, it comes out into your creativity.
And the thing I'll add to that is make that coffee for you, the consumer. When you make that coffee, you got the consumer across from you, but think about you, the guy that wants to make that coffee and drink that coffee. So I tell people when I play, I'm playing for me, the fan, not me, the musician. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm just trying to relate to what the guy out in the audience likes, which is me. I'm a music fan, so I'm going to relate to that. But that's the way to, I can't wait to read your book. I will definitely get a copy of it. I will buy one. Support this. Is it available now online to buy, or is it, can I?
Well, yeah, it is listed on Amazon, although I'm not sure that they're actually selling it yet. But the book publisher is, well, you can find it on my Facebook.
All right.
So,
I copy today.
yeah, and it's called Book Locker is the publisher.
Okay.
But anyway, it's on Facebook, Facebook page, which you can easily find. But yeah, it's great because for me, it's just like I always say this, but it's true. I'm really good at starting and continuing, but not so great at completing. So,
that is a good segue, because I always tell kids when they say, how do you define success? And this is something I learned from Joe Diorio. Success is completion. If you set up to go write a tune, write the tune. If you set up to do a recording, finish the recording. If you set out to do a gig, do the gig. If you set out to do a tour, do the tour. All that stuff. And you can look at the end of the completion and say, well, it didn't get me here, but you got to complete it. So now you could go to the next thing. Because too many people go like, well, when I get my record done, I'm going to work on it for 15 years and maybe I'll do the perfect record. It's like, it's never going to be perfect. You have to know when it's time to finish something and then go on to the next thing. And that, I'll tell another story. I worked with a guy in Germany who's a really big promoter for jazz, Carsten Janke. And anybody that knows him, he's been working with Pat Metheny for 35 years. He worked with Chick before Chick passed. He worked with everybody. Keith Jarrett. No, Keith he didn't work with because Keith had to be within flying distance to a hotel in France, but it's another story. So Carsten and I met because he had this agency that put tours together. I knew about him. And we had recorded our 5th record without a record company. That we decided to do it on our own. We got some investors and we went and did it. And I was looking for a record label to release it on. But I saw that he had some tours going on with a bunch of people that we'd worked with, like Spyro Gyra. So I sent him the album and said, hey, Carsten, if you got any spots open on some tours, we'd love to. I had no idea that he had a record label. Love to play. I get this phone call from this guy. And he goes, yeah, I work for Carsten Janke. And what do you want to do? Do you want to tour? Do you want to have a record? I said, well, it's our 5th record. He goes, well, we have a record label. We can put the record out. We can put you on tour. And so I had no idea. I mean, I just was looking to try to get on as an opening act. And we ended up putting the record out. And we did a really big, extensive tour together with Spyro Gyra, who I know those guys from the MCA days. They're good buddies of ours. So we did that tour. And in the end, my initial thing was just to see if I could get one gig, and I ended up with this whole thing. So you never know what's going to come out of something unless you give that effort.
Yeah. I'm going to take your advice. I always know, I've known forever that I have trouble stopping, but you're right. It's really, I think that's a really good thing to focus on, complete something,
That's success. If you complete something and you can say, if I had never completed this, I could never talk about it. Like, hey, I wish I did that thing with Joe, or, I never got it out. It doesn't, what happens after is out of our hands.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that one way or the other, whether it's whatever people call success just means you complete it. It brings you to the next place. Because if you're kind of in this thing where you're like, I got to finish that. I never finished that. It's never going to have a life other than just being that unfinished thing. And the idea is try to finish it, so see what it will bring. Because I believe the universe will go like, okay, now you finished it, so now I'll give you this task. And
I agree. also, if you don't finish it, it sits around
Yes.
like a cluttered house, just sits there,
Well, I have a project that I put together. I talked about my mom's family being in World War II, and the album Batavia, which is an album from 2010 of the David Becker Tribune. It's a long record, but I wrote songs about, and they're instrumental, but about stories about my family in the war. And there's a 12-page booklet with vignettes about each of the tunes. That's become an ongoing project, and I was set to do something with the Metropole Orchestra in the Netherlands to do a concert in 2020. But because of COVID, that all got canceled. So now that we're sort of hopefully post-COVID, I'm planning on not doing a concert just yet, but I'm going to do a recording session to have them record all the pieces of music from Batavia with a 50-piece orchestra. I wrote all the arrangements, and then do a documentary about the history so that we can present it, because it's a subject that I've wanted to talk about a lot, and I have over the years, but because this thing got squelched, I want to make sure that I finish what I started and continue the process. So I have that on the agenda as well.
Yeah. Now, you and I were speaking about that before the show started, but I'd like to know a little bit more about that. How you started that project and why.
I was always interested in, I mean, when I grew up, my mom, I knew she was in a prison camp. And when you're 10, you think Hogan's Heroes. You don't have any idea of what that means to be. Now, she was interned in Indonesia, the Dutch East Indies, under the Japanese, but they were labor camps, just like the Germans had in Germany. And they worked even harder because there was no Red Cross to kind of see what was happening when the war broke out. The Dutch were under siege, and my mother's stepfather was Minister of Agriculture, and they had been given the notification they're invading the islands. You can leave. We'll send an airplane and you can go to Australia. And my mom's stepfather said, no, I'm going to stay and defend my homeland. Told my grandmother, you take the kids, you go to Australia, I'll come when I can, but I'm going to stay and fight. And she said, no, I'm going to stay with you. And lucky that they said that, because the plane that left for Australia that they were supposed to go on crashed and everybody got killed.
Oh my God.
I wouldn't be here if that happened.
Wow.
But my mom, her younger brother, she had two older brothers, a brother and sister. They went back to the Netherlands, so they were there. But my mom's younger brother and her mother were interned in camp. Her stepfather was taken into prison right away, and he was supposed to be killed because he's on the death list. But he got dysentery right away, and they put him in the infirmary. And somebody in the infirmary, a Dutch doctor, saw that he was this known guy in the government, so they put a fake name on his bed, and the Japanese didn't know who he was. So he was constantly being sent to different camps, and he was always on the move because of that. Now, when my mom was interned with her mother, her younger brother, when he turned 10, they took him away and brought him to a camp of men. And I'll never forget this story. There's a song on the record. I'll send you the MP3. It's called In Search of His Father. My uncle had to leave the camp with my mom, and my grandmother was working in the kitchen, so she took some stuff. She stole food and gave it to my uncle and said, you take this, and when you get to the camp that you're going to be in, don't show it to anybody. You keep it for yourself. So he got in the truck, and they drove all over Java, wherever they drove to. And he got to this camp, and he said that when he got there, he just had this desire to go find his father. He was like, I got to find my father. So every Dutch soldier prisoner that he saw, he asked, have you seen my father? And none of them had seen him. And he snuck out of the camp because the grass was tall. He could walk. The gate was open because the men had to work in the fields and do hard labor. So he walked through the jungle looking for his father. And then he wound up in some area where there were Dutch soldiers that were doing their detail for the Japanese. And they said, son, what are you doing here? If you get caught, they're gonna kill us. So we're gonna hide you in the truck, because they would pick him up in trucks. They brought him back to the camp. He was so exhausted, he said, that he laid down on a bed, and all of a sudden he felt somebody pulling on his toe, and he woke up, and it was his father. And my uncle was an animated guy. He was a clothing designer. He worked at the MGM Grand his last years of life. He was a funny guy. I never saw him tear up like that. But I said, "What did you say?" I asked him that, but I said that, and he just had tears in his eyes. And his father said, "I have to go. They're going to take me away, but I'm going to come back and find you." And 2 years later, they were reunited. And it was because my grandmother, when they got released, they didn't know they were free. You know, the bomb dropped on the 6th of August, but they didn't tell the Dutch prisoners, "Hey, you're free." They heard word that something happened. And then the Japanese came and said, "Well, something happened in Japan, and we're going to give you more food now." And now you have to remember, they were living on little bits of kale and rice all day. That was all they got. So when they started giving them meat again, people got sick, and they, had dysentery and all this stuff. The rumor was that something happened and the war was over, but nobody told them. So about September, my grandmother said, "This is ridiculous. I'm going to go find your father and your brother." So, and she was a tough lady. She was, her whole story I could write a whole book about, which I'm going to do. She went on a train to where they knew the prisoners were that were left over from all the camps, because they had camps everywhere all over the islands. And, Indonesia's got like hundreds of islands. So to find all the Dutch prisoners was tough. And luckily she got to Bandung and found my uncle and his father. And when she got there, she burned their clothes because they were full of lice. So they got to leave on Christmas Eve of 1945. They got to fly back to the Netherlands. Now, my mom's stepfather was totally emaciated from the camps. He was very sick. So they kind of said, "Well, we got to make sure we get you to a hospital when we get to the Netherlands." In Indonesia in December, it's warm, but in Holland, it's cold. So they were going to stop in Cairo to refuel. And the guy on the plane told my grandmother, "When you get into Cairo, don't speak German, don't speak English, speak French," because she spoke 4 languages. "And go buy whatever you have to buy, and then we're going to come back and we'll fly on to Amsterdam." They left my mom's stepfather on the plane. He was totally, sleeping, and they said, "Just leave him. We're only going to be gone a couple hours." Well, some idiot took the stairs away from the plane, but left the door open. He woke up. It was totally dark. He walked out, fell off the plane, broke every bone in his body.
Oh my God.
In the hospital. And my grandmother could fly back to the Netherlands, and she got permission to fly back to be with her husband for 2 weeks, that she could accompany him when he healed. But he never fully recovered. He died about a year later. He was bedridden for that entire time. And he got a post at the United Nations. So my mom was going to be the stepdaughter of a United Nations guy, but that didn't come to fruition. And interestingly, when my mom and the family landed in Amsterdam, my grandmother got off the plane, and my uncle, her other brother, who was in the Netherlands, had joined the Marines in the US to liberate the Dutch. They trained at Camp Lejeune, and they were all gung-ho to go, and they got on the boat, but then the bomb dropped, and they didn't have to go. So he was all standing proud in his uniform. His mother's coming off the plane. He hadn't seen her in 5 years or 4 years, right? Longer, probably. And she looked at him and said, "What the hell are you doing in a uniform? The war's over." And she went to the commander of the Marines and said, "I was in 2 world wars. I was in a prison camp. There's going to be another world war. I don't want my son serving in any military. You're going to let him out." So they said, "Okay, if he does a detail on the North Sea in a lighthouse for 2 months, then he can be discharged." So. Are you still there, Cathy? Your picture's gone, but.
Yeah, let's see. Hold on. Hold on one second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Sure.
Okay, I really don't know how to get out of this. I'm going to take this strange opportunity to end.
Yeah, that's fine.
I got a message that Frontier said that there was an outage in this area, so
Okay.
it's not
We're without power.
which is, I guess it's good. I hope. I'm not going to open the refrigerator. So,
Okay.
David, that was an amazing story. Oh my God. That's an amazing, absolutely amazing history. Unbelievable.
I'm working on a book with that as well. But check out the record Batavia. I'll send you some stuff, and that musically kind of tells the story. And it was a really tough project to do, but it's one I'm extremely proud of.
That's fantastic. Thank you for being on. I'm sorry, we had this.
We improvised. We improvised. Things happen.
Improvised, and it would be lovely to get together with you sometime and just play.
I would love to. That'd be great.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thanks for your patience. Tomorrow, I have a very interesting artist who I've known for years named Vinx. He's a singer, and he's been very, very creative for years. He's on tomorrow. And then Wednesday, a really great singer who used to live here. She recorded all the demos for the Bergmans. Her name's Peggy Lauren, and she has lived in Texas for a long time. But keep coming back and have a great day. It's a really gorgeous day out here in LA. And David, good luck with your packing.
Thank you.
And let's talk soon.
Yes. All right. You take care.
All right. You too. Thanks, everyone.